Welcome, everyone. My name is Jennifer Parrish Taylor. I am the Northwest Regional Advocacy Manager for Compassion and Choices. And today I will be joined by Kim Callinan, our President and CEO, and two great volunteers and storytellers with Compassion and Choices, Dan Winter and John Forsgren. I will let you know that this meeting will be recorded. There will be opportunities to ask questions, but for now, I just ask that you remain on mute, and we will signal when you can ask questions. And so you can either come off mute and ask your question, or you can type it into the chat box and we'll be sure to read the question out so everyone can hear it and get an answer for you. So at this moment, I'd love to turn it over to Kim Callinan.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. Welcome, everybody. It's nice to see some familiar faces here. Really excited to have a chance to talk with everybody, and sorry that it couldn't be in person. I really do miss being able to get together with everybody in person. I hope that people are weathering this very difficult time. I know this has been a challenge for people in so many different ways, and it certainly has been for us at Compassion and Choices. As you all know, in March, when things really started to heat up with COVID-19, that resulted in some very major changes for our plans for this, for the upcoming year. State legislatures across the country shut down, and the most pressing need became, how do we make sure that people who are terminally ill at the end of their life are able to access quality end-of-life care without exposing themselves to COVID and putting their lives at greater risk. The other big change was the move towards a recognition from people about the fragility of their lives, which did present an opportunity to do some more education around the importance of advanced care planning. So as an organization, while behind the scenes, we continue to do everything we can to advance medical aid in dying, and we did a lot of work in states like Oregon around implementation and the impact that COVID was having on people being able to access the law. We also used that moment to do a lot of work around telehealth, advocacy work to try to improve the telehealth laws, both federally and in the states, along with many others, and we're successful at being able to take away some of the perverse incentives that made it disincentives for healthcare providers to participate. And I think we've seen some good care taking place as a result of being able to do that, but there are also some things that are concerning, and so we're monitoring that to figure out what's the long-term impact it has and what are the changes that we want to see become permanent changes, because the reality is if we're able to improve the telehealth laws, more people will be able to realize their goal of being able to get care delivered in the comfort of their own home. We also are doing some advocacy work around advanced care planning. The reality is, with a shortage of resources, the impact has been that more people you're seeing a move towards rationing of care with third-party decision makers making decisions on behalf of people. And that ultimately leads to inequities in the kind of care somebody gets, then it's inconsistent with what they want and not what we want to take place. So we're trying to really encourage more advanced care planning conversations to take place. And we know that when people are consulted in advance and are thoughtful about what they want, that they will make decisions that are different, that are typically less invasive than the kind of care that a person will get if they just end up in the emergency room. And so if we can get more advanced care planning to take place, especially among people who are vulnerable, more highly vulnerable, live in nursing homes, are have comorbidities, you will see the need for less rationing of care. And then those people who want the increased care, it will be available for them. So that has been a big emphasis of our work around COVID moving forward. And we developed a COVID-19 toolkit to help people with advanced care planning. And if you haven't seen that toolkit, I would strongly encourage you to take a look at it, because it really does help to break down what are the points that you need to be thinking about in terms of the kind of care that you would want to get or would not want to get. And it's really, really helpful. And we have both the toolkit, and then Dr. Grube did a really wonderful presentation around kind of what are those decision points and how do you think about them. I would also encourage people to check out the website and the latest statistics, because initially when COVID hit, the number of people who were recovering with a ventilator was extremely low, and they were pretty dismal statistics, especially for older people or for people with comorbidities. But as people have learned more about the disease, those statistics have improved. So you want to be sure that you're making decisions about what you might want based on the latest information that's available, or that you assign the decision to a healthcare proxy who knows kind of what is important for you, who will make the best decision for you in that moment. So that toolkit is really important, as is thinking about whether you want to give flexibility to your healthcare proxy or what decisions you might want to otherwise make. So that's all of the work that's been taking place around COVID-19. But at the same time, you know, one of our largest programs is advancing medical aid in dying across the country. And we do that both by authorizing more states and by helping to ensure that people are able to access the law. Of course, in Oregon, you guys have had this law now for over 20 years. You've been our pioneers, and even most recently made one small revision to the law that really did improve it. One of the things that we are just in the early stages of looking at is whether or not we want to bring some new changes before the Oregon legislature in order to improve the law so that more eligible people are able to access the law. So this is something that we're discussing. It wouldn't change the eligibility criteria. It would simply be removing some of the regulatory roadblocks and making it so that there's greater access to the law. So as an example, perhaps advanced care practice registered nurses being able to serve as the attending physician or the consulting physician. That's one example of the kind of changes that we're looking at. And we are in conversations with the Deaf with Dignity National Center. We're really trying to work more collaboratively and recognize that if we were to do this and we do this together, that would be in the best interest of the movement. So those conversations and discussions are underway, and certainly welcome your input and your thoughts and perspectives around that. We did just hire or starting September 1st, we will have a new lobbyist in Oregon who will be working to educate Oregon lawmakers about the Oregon Deaf with Dignity law, because it has been so long since that law was passed that while Oregon is the leader, most of the lawmakers know very little about the law. And so that important groundwork needs to start now. The third big program, and we are fortunate to have Dan and John here to talk a little bit about their experience with that program, is the work that we're doing around dementia. And there's perhaps no place I go where I don't end up in a discussion with somebody who is concerned about dementia. And we also know that as a result of COVID-19, you're seeing an increased number of people experiencing dementia because of the impact COVID has. If you end up on a ventilator and come off of it, that's causing more dementia. So you already have 1 in 3 seniors dying from dementia. Those numbers are growing, and we don't really have a good solution for people. So we did launch earlier this year some really great tools to help people be able to pre-claim their voice so that they could forego treatments if they were to end up with dementia. And Dan and John are going to talk more about those tools and their experience with it. But what we also know is similar to medical aid in dying, there is what is your legal right to do something. So the legal right does exist to forego treatments right now. But what will the experience of a person being who trying to do that? Unfortunately, right now with our current legal system, people are running into a lot of roadblocks within medicine. And so one of the things that we're looking at down the line is how do we make sure that people's legal right to forego treatments and to voluntarily stop eating and drinking is going to be respected within the healthcare system. We've done some work in Florida in order to bring the healthcare community along, and that's work that we will continue to do in Oregon and other states as well, and it may require down the line legislation. So that's sort of the gamut of the things that we're doing. The last and very important piece of the work that we're doing is work around disparities in end-of-life care. We know right now that unfortunately, communities of color are less likely to have access to hospice care. They are less likely to get access to adequate pain management. They're less likely to fill out an advance directive, and therefore they are more likely to suffer an unfortunate, devastating end-of-life experience. And so one of the things that we're really doing is to try to improve, we're doing a public education campaign to try to improve awareness about the importance of planning for the end, and filling out an advance directive. And we're looking at legislative policies to ensure that vulnerable communities have access to adequate pain management, hospice, and palliative care. So we've got some advocacy work taking place on the federal level in that regard, and those are really critical efforts that are underway. Those efforts are essential because you have basically two worlds that's taking place. You've got a world that's taking place for people who are privileged, who are thinking about things like, you know, how do I have autonomy at the end of life? And you have another community of people who's saying, I just need access to adequate care, and that's what's important to me. And it is our job as leaders to figure out how do we close that gap, because the reality is our mission is about ensuring that everybody has access to adequate end-of-life care, and we can't do that if we're only satisfying the needs of one community. So that's kind of the broad strokes of where we're at, what's moving forward with the movement. I'm now so delighted and privileged to have with us on the call today Dan Winter and John Forsgren. And Dan is going to talk about his experience. He is in the early stages of dementia and has used our tools, and he's going to talk about kind of his journey along the way. And John and his partner is going to share a little bit about his experience serving as Dan's partner. So with that, I turn things over to Dan and John.
Thanks, Kim. I got a little aside here. I'm very proud to be involved with an organization that is looking at equity like you just described. I appreciate that. When I was 59 years old, 3 years ago, my son told me he thought I should get tested for dementia. My father had dementia. He lived 13 years after his diagnosis. I got tested, and after the first day, I thought I'd done pretty well on the tests. They're administered in 2 or 3 hour periods over 2 days. And by the end of the second day, I felt very confident that I'd gotten most of that right. And he graded my paper, and it was 58 out of 100. So I was immediately diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment, which is a phrase that's used to describe early dementia patients who are not yet slotted into a dementia category. My dementia category is Alzheimer's, and my symptoms have grown. They've gotten more assertive recently. I consider myself entering mid-stage dementia or mid-stage Alzheimer's. But I want to go back to my dad. He was extremely vital, man. He traveled the country and traveled the world in business and for pleasure. He was a polymath. He taught himself to do tons of different things. And he was a very vital fella who, until he was 70, is that right? Yeah, until he was 70, when he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And he had a slow, inexorable decline. The last time I saw him was 2 or 3 months before his death. We were sitting together. I hadn't seen him for 3 months before that. And we were sitting together, and he was not there. He had full-blown advanced dementia. He was in a care home for 14 other individuals. He had very good care. He had family coming in to check on him all the time. But he was done. He was out. There was no light left. There was no capacity for him, as far as I could tell, for him to indicate empathy or love or ambition or happiness or humor or anything. It occurred to me that I was sitting next to somebody who is devoid of humanity, which is an awful thing to say about a living person, but I believe that it's true, that he ran out of humanity as he was living with this disease. I made a vow to myself at that moment that I wasn't going to let that happen to me if I had any choice in the matter. Let's fast forward to three years later, maybe. Maybe I don't have that timetable right, but I got my own diagnosis, and that gave dying and living an extra dimension that I didn't know how to handle quite. And one of the first things I did was strengthen my resolve to communicate with my friends and family, my loved ones, how I wanted to live, how I wanted to die. And I indicated to them that I needed and wanted their support. I fully intend to be involved in the manner of my death and the manner of my life going forward. That's why it's very important to me to have discovered that Compassion and Choices had put together a very sophisticated program for dementia patients at the end of life. My husband, John, and I, who's sitting right next to me, he'll be talking in a minute, we sat down together and we answered the 15 questions that was on the dementia toolkit. And I was able to determine and put on paper and create a framework for how I wanted to die and how I wanted to live. I did not want any actions taken to prolong my life if I was in the hospital. And I don't want them to treat me any differently because I have Alzheimer's. It was the Alzheimer's, or the Dementia Toolkit has really been a really great backstop for me as I continue to live my life. What I'm having to do is to understand that I have to give up some good time in order to be able to affect my own death. But in the meantime, I know that I'm covered with the Dementia Toolkit and the Dementia Addendum to my advance directive that is now in the hands of my husband and my son, who are the first and second healthcare proxies. They're my personal physician. The hospital that I would most likely go to has a copy of it. I have a couple siblings who have copies of it. And it's become an important document for me to rely on so I can have some peace about that. Likewise, when COVID came, the last thing I wanted to do was to be hooked to a ventilator. And I have the same capacity to communicate with my healthcare providers and my family and my healthcare proxies that I don't want any COVID-related recovery programs. I don't want to be treated for COVID. That's a choice that I've been able to make very clear in the COVID the COVID decoder, and addendum, the COVID-19 addendum to my advance directive is sitting over there on the kitchen table. I have to get 2 witnesses for it. I've already got one, and I need to get my neighbor to sign off on the other. And then I'm going to send it to all the places where my advance directive is, all the places that I referenced earlier.
Can I jump in here, Dan?
Please do.
One of the things I wanted to mention was how we made use of the dementia toolkit. Obviously, Dan and I had lots of conversations after his diagnosis about how he wanted to live and how he wanted to die. But the next step was to have that conversation with his 3 children and their mother, who remains a very important part of our family. And we were able to sit down with all of them and go through the dementia toolkit. And it was a really effective and easy way to dance into conversations that most of us spend a lot of energy avoiding. And so it doesn't need to be the be-all, end-all. I see it as a really good introduction to discussing end-of-life choices that can foster conversations about any number of things once those doors have been opened. So we were able to sit down with his kids and their mother, and by the end of that conversation, we'd gone through all 15 questions, and we basically had buy-in from all of them on all of those questions. And we left with a sense of real security, knowing that the plans that we are making, that Dan is making, are known, accepted, and well understood by his children and their mother.
Thanks, John. Are there any questions from any of you about what John and I have been talking about, or about our experience?
I would just remind folks that you can come off mute to ask those questions, or if you'd prefer to, you can chat it in the box and I will read them off.
I can add just one more thing in terms of what has happened with Dan and me. We already had a relationship that allowed for conversations about difficult pieces of our lives. As somebody who's lived through the AIDS epidemic, a number of these issues are things that I thought about decades ago as I came to terms with what was then supposed to be the end of my life. And I suspect other people have had experiences that they can relate to this kind of end-of-life circumstance. And I encourage people to do that, to look at their own experience and the experiences of their family and friends, and see how that can lead to the conversations they need to have with family members.
So it looks like we do have a question from Priscilla, and she says, "Thank you, Dan and John. I'm curious if there was initial pushback from your children and any advice, if so."
Pushback. First let me tell you that I started them, I put them first after John in terms of understanding that I was going to determine the manner and timing of my own death. I told them that I wasn't going to let Alzheimer's kill me. That I didn't want to live and die like my dad did. I didn't want to be that way in the final years, months, and days of my life, and that I was going to determine that for myself. They indicated support right away. And it was difficult for them, I think, to imagine losing their father, but it was tough for me to tell them that they were going to lose their father. Right now, they're very supportive and loving, and we're updating them regularly about my condition, and particularly as it relates to any timing that I'm maybe coming up with for the end of life. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very, very much.
I would just add a little bit to that. They, of his 3 children, they didn't all immediately say yes, because the questions are, this is so deeply emotional, that it did take a little bit of time after Dan talked to them initially for them all to get on the same page. And that's not to say that there were objections, but the process of thinking through these end-of-life decisions and just took them independently, one a little bit longer than the other, one a little bit longer than the other. But that is, those are issues that are far behind us now, and they're enormously supportive.
And the reason that part of the reason they are comfortable is because of the dementia addendum and now the COVID addendum. The dementia addendum gave us a framework for us to talk about what I will not live with. Mm-hmm. And it brought them into the discussion. It was a format that they could understand and follow with us as we tried to make the determinations of what I was going to live with. It was extremely helpful. I frankly don't know where we'd be if we didn't have that tool.
Thank you so much. It looks like we have 2 additional questions.
Yeah, and Jennifer, I can go ahead and answer the question from David Greenberg. So David asked the question, how do you address the fact that the Oregon law requires 6 months to live and you could have much more than that time left? So what the dementia tool does is it allows for a person to forego medical treatment or to stop eating and drinking, which everybody has the legal right to do right now. But it is often not recognized that that is one's legal right. So what Dan and John have done is they've used the tool. There are like 13 markers within the tool, and they allow you to identify the point at which you would want to forego treatments and stop eating and drinking. And then you want to work to find a supportive doctor so that you have a doctor lined up who's willing to support you in advance. But you're not accessing medical aid in dying. It has nothing to do with medical aid in dying. It's about stopping eating and drinking and foregoing treatments, which you do want to do with the support of a doctor.
Thank you so much, Kim. There is a question from Barbara. Can you think of any place where denial and avoidance can serve a good purpose? It's a bit of a philosophical question.
I can say yes, in that it gives you an idea where people are in their process of dealing with end-of-life questions. I did have the experience, I draw a lot on my experience with HIV/AIDS, and did a lot of public speaking about what it was like to live with that virus. And so I saw a lot of resistance on the part of people in the various groups that I was speaking to. And I learned over time that their resistance began to disappear when they saw that my heart was really in what I was talking about. That that's how humans learn the best, is when people are speaking from their heart. And even though people disagreed with me as a human because I was gay, people disagreed with me or objected to me because I was positive. By the time I finished most of my talks, I had people who had clearly been resistant changed their minds. I became a human. I didn't become a category. And so I always encourage people to speak from their heart as wholly and as completely as they can. And it just opens doors.
I can say briefly that it sounds, I don't know, it sounds a little harshish, but there has really been no opportunity for denial regarding what's going to happen to me with this disease. From the very beginning, I work to keep denial out of the program.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that.
And, you know, it actually, the question ties really nicely to the earlier question that we had about, you know, what do you do if you see resistance from your family? And one thing that I've heard from other advocates who are in the early stages of dementia who are using the tool is that by addressing front end with their family member, I understand that you're in a place of denial and that it's easier to not think about this, but I love you. And there's going to become a moment where my condition is going to really deteriorate and I'm no longer going to be able to make decisions. And when that moment hits, I want you to have clarity from me about what it is that I would want, so that you are not put in a position where you have to make very difficult decisions that are made out of uncertainty or grief instead of out of love. And will you do me the honor of letting me share with you what's important to me? Because while I wish this wasn't the situation, it unfortunately is. So that sort of framework where you're acknowledging the denial and the grief, and also letting them know that this is about your love for them, might be an opening for a family member that's having difficulty. I actually used it for my parents, and they were very, very resistant. They did not have, they don't have dementia, although we do have a history in our family. And it wasn't until I told my mother I needed her to be thinking about this so that I wasn't put in a position where I was making difficult decisions that I didn't know what she wanted, that she was finally willing to have the conversation with me. So
I think that's such a great point. I'd like to open the call up to any questions that folks may have for either Dan, John, or Kim. And it looks like there is one for you, Kim, in terms of, you know, what happens if you're in a facility and they will not honor your wishes to not be fed?
So this is so very difficult, and my strongest advice would be for people to really have these conversations in advance so you don't end up in this situation. What some people have successfully been able to do is to stop eating and drinking, and then to get sent home from the facility if they have the means. And this is where our healthcare system does favor people who have the means. But once you make the decision and you stop eating and drinking, if you're in your home, it's a 2-week to a month process. So if the person has hit the point that they do want to forego treatments, it would be much easier if you were at home and not in a facility. And if you have the ability to be able to do that, that's the easiest way to make it happen. So that is an option, but I realize that requires people to have a supportive family and means. And so planning in advance would be the other, thing that could help make sure that you get your wishes met. And of course, what we ultimately want to do is make this far easier by changing the way medicine is delivered and improving the law so that there are some protections and you'll have more people willing to participate, just like we have with medical aid and dying.
Great, thank you. And again, just a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question, you can either come off mute or you can type it into the chat box and I will read it out. So yeah, if there's any other questions, now's the time.
Kim, I might add one thing that John and I did with my physician was inquire about whether palliative care was going to be able to be applied in that situation where a patient decides to forego eating and drinking. And he said kind of a iffy yes. I have to nail him down on that, but he thought so.
Yeah, you do
But I
want,
encourage people to ask that question.
that is a great question, Dan. You're absolutely right. And you do for sure want that. I would say one of the benefits of living in a state like Oregon is because you do have medical aid and dying laws, and there are doctors who are used to honoring patients' values and priorities. While this is a different application and it is not about your death with dignity law, doctors who are supportive of that are also more likely to understand how do you support a patient through dementia, make sure they get adequate pain medication. So you have a much more primed medical system and healthcare providers than other places have.
And I might add one other thing, that having grown up in a house where my father was a doctor and my mother was a nurse, I have a somewhat different perspective on how to talk about healthcare, because they were very straightforward. But I know that's not necessarily the case between a lot of doctors and their patients. But I really encourage people to maybe find even other ways to get into those conversations, talking about family, asking your doctor about their family. That kind of intimate relationship, and I use that in big quotation marks, with your healthcare provider facilitates both asking and answering more difficult questions. I had the same relationship with the same doctor for HIV for over 20 years. And it meant that I could bring information to her, she could bring information to me, and the hard questions were always addressed.
I also noticed, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I noticed that Barbara is on the call, and as I assume lots of the folks on this call know, she's the author of the amazing book, Finish Strong, which has a terrific chapter around dementia on it. So I didn't realize she's going to be on the call, so I'm going to put her on the spot and see if there is any great words of wisdom that she'd like to share with us. And hopefully she's someplace where I could put her on the spot and she can speak.
That's sweet of you.
Sorry.
I'm at the beach. Looks like I'm in a tent, but I'm not. I'm not actually in a tent. It's just wonderful to have this conversation with you, Dan and John. You know, my question about denial and avoidance, and your response was wonderful, Kim, because the question is, how can you turn that to a good purpose? And if the purpose is to urge you to come to the conversation with your full heart and expose yourself and be vulnerable, that might just be the thing that enables your family and your physician too, you know, in certain situations, to join you in the candor that you really want. So thank you for the answers to that question. You know, it always comes up, the same question: how do I deal with my loved one's denial, with their avoidance, with their unwillingness, obstreperousness, unwillingness to talk about this? And that's a really good answer. And it's also reassuring, you know, to people to say, it's just a stage, you know, they have to go through it, and help them go through it by bringing your whole self and courageously bringing your whole heart.
If you think about it, the person with dementia, they actually experience, you know, the stages of grief twice. The first time when really 3 times, when they find out you're going to have dementia, then when you first lose your functioning and your ability to remember them, and then again when you finally die. And so you think about them kind of going through those 7 stages of grief because they have first learned that they're going to lose you. The more you can help them move through those stages of grief, the more likely they'll be able to join you at the place that you are, which is often, you know, with dementia and with all illnesses, the dying person is almost always in front of where their loved ones are. So, or often, I shouldn't say almost always, often in front of where their loved ones are.
Right. And what you said, Kim, too, struck me about, you know, leading with love. You know, this is because I love you. And for the time when I can't make decisions for myself, I want you to be clear, crystal clear, and have no doubts. The other aspect of that, which is the first time I've actually thought about that, is the other half of the message is when the time comes that I can't tell you I love you, know this.
Yeah.
Thanks, Barbara.
Yeah, no, I think that was beautiful. So I just want to thank Dan and John for sharing their stories, for all of you for answering the questions. I'm going to transition the call to just give a brief update of what we're doing in the state, and we'll open it up again if there's any. Yeah.
Hey, Jennifer, I'm sorry. Before you
Yeah, no worries.
transition, I also noticed that we have Ann Jackson on the line, and she is a kind of legend healthcare hospice provider. And I was just wanted to give her a chance if she had anything that she wanted to add.
Absolutely.
She doesn't know that I'm doing this. So Ann, if you can't speak or you don't want to, feel free to say it. But I did see your name, and I wanted to recognize your expertise.
And yes, my name is there. And I am very antique, and I have been going over the same issue with my daughter recently as to she is going to be taking me to Switzerland at some point. But we have discussed it and she has agreed and so on and so forth. So I don't know why. I look awful anyway. I just had surgery for my eyes. Good thing you can't see me.
Well, thank you for sharing that and being so vulnerable with that. Thank you.
Thank you. This has been excellent. I really appreciate Dan and John's comments.
Good to see you, Anne.
Good to see you.
Good luck to you.
May I say one more thing before we move?
Absolutely.
I am, let's see if I can do this. Yeah. I am walking through Alzheimer's, holding my husband's hand, his Alzheimer's, holding his hand. And we waited too long. So all I can say to you is, as Dan and John have said, begin early for yourself or anyone that you think you can have this conversation with about themselves. It's really important. So that's all I have to say.
That's excellent advice. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Priscilla, for having the courage to share that, because that will have a positive impact on everybody else. So I'm sorry, but thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you, Priscilla. It serves a good purpose, to be a cautionary tale, as well. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, again, for sharing that. And before I jump into my update, I also just wanted to introduce the other part of our team here in Portland on the organizing side, organizing advocacy side. So again, it's myself, Jennifer Parrish-Taylor, and Rose. I don't know if she's can come on video just to wave to folks so they know she's there. We will be your point of contacts in the States as it relates to organizing and advocacy. And so if you have any questions, you can reach out to us, and I'll have our contact information toward the end of the call. So I'm going to share my screen with the presentation I have prepared. So just bear with me. Okay, great. So what's happening on the ground in Oregon? Well, since in 2019, Compassion and Choices was part of the testimony that was given for SB 579, which Kim alluded to. And SB 579 was a bill that reduced the mandatory waiting period. And Governor Brown signed this bill into law, and it's since been a bill in the state of Oregon since January 1st. of this year. And during the emergency legislative session that took place here in the state as a response to the pandemic, we were part of the conversations concerning SB 1606 in collaboration with Death with Dignity National Center to put in our input, submit testimony, and really SB 1606 was a bill requiring medical facilities to allow individuals with disabilities to designate a support person to be present with them in the emergency department and during a hospital stay to help the patient in explaining medical choices and decisions. It also reinforces the importance of clinicians adhering to individuals' advance directives, their PULSE, and other legally designated healthcare proxies. And we, found it important that even though we're in the midst of a pandemic, that their rights should not be infringed upon during this moment, as we, as the state tries to address, the needs of our communities. And continuing, we're also in the state doing capacity building. So what does that mean? That means we're educating the public and building grassroots support. We're strengthening the support of lawmakers, identifying allied organizations, empowering individuals to chart their end-of-life journey. And we have several action teams that are meeting regularly in the state, including here in Portland. And as Kim mentioned, we are preparing for the upcoming legislative session by hiring a lobbyist who will work in consultation with us to develop a strategy and really take the temperature of legislators to see, where folks are at in terms of advancing legislation here in the States. And we also have ongoing events such as our Death Dialogue series, which we launched and have had great success in attendance, and really, folks appreciating the conversations we're having around normalizing the fact that we all die. And bringing up, these issues, whether you're having a diagnosis of dementia or such with our advanced directive workshops, talking to your friends and families about what your wishes are in the face of becoming potentially incapacitated, so that, to Kim's point, doing this as an act of love so that our friends and family don't have to think about what our wishes are. They already know them because we've pre-filled out and explained and talked to our friends and family through our advanced directive so that they know our wishes. And so that leads me to, what can you do now? Well, we would love for you to become a volunteer. We would love for you to join our action team or even start one in your area. We will be asking for and encouraging folks to contact their legislator, not only about this issue, but also with the upcoming election cycle, asking legislators, I should say, to continue to make sure that medical aid in dying is still accessible in the state of Oregon and that they're open to improving upon the statute. We'd also love for folks to write op-eds about their experience and sharing their stories. And that can also manifest in becoming a storyteller for compassion and choices, or being an advocate. So when we are, in the process of doing lobby days at the Capitol and we're speaking to legislators, what we found to be most effective is for constituents to really share their story about, how they're impacted by the law, what potential barriers they may be facing, and really urging, their legislators to support any proposed legislation. And this also can include representing compassion and choices at local events. Because we're in a pandemic, much of those local events are virtual. And we can definitely help you, Rose and myself, help you to set up the logistical side of those events in terms of hosting them. So if it's, you want to have a book club meeting with friends and family to talk about Barbara Coomley's great book, you can do that. We'll set up the Zoom for you so you don't have to worry about that. It would just be on you to recruit people to that event. And lastly, follow us on social media. We love to engage and have dialogue through our Facebook, through Twitter, through Instagram, and really, would encourage folks, again, this is a place where you can share your story and your journey, and why medical aid in dying is important to you. Because, you know, as I mentioned, how we move this movement forward really is one story at a time, and being vulnerable and sharing our experience with others. And so that leads me to where you can follow us on social media. So we're on Twitter. Kim C has her own handle at Kim Callinan. We're on Facebook. Oregon has its own dedicated page, as well as there's a national page. There's a YouTube channel, Compassion Choices, and we also have an Instagram page, Compassion and Choices. So I encourage you, if you haven't already, to check those out and follow us. And then there's some great resources that we have available on our website. As Kim mentioned, we have a COVID-19 toolkit where you can go to understand your options, using telehealth to reduce your risk, advanced care planning, a COVID-19 addendum to your advanced directive, which Dan spoke about in his story and how effective and easy it was to fill that out, and dying in the age of the pandemic. We also have end-of-life care planning tools available as well. So you can visit our Plan Your Care Resource Center and Tools to Finish Strong. And you can also visit our website to see where our past webinars are. So videos such as this that we've had nationally, you can go and visit, and there's some great topics that we've covered throughout this pandemic as we had to pivot to doing things more virtually. So I encourage everyone to check those out. And also, I would encourage you, like, if you're looking to volunteer and you want to, maybe you don't want to do a book club hosting, I would encourage you to show one of our webinars and do a question and answer series with that. And again, we can help you set those up and get the word out about those events. And lastly, we have our resources as it relates to the Dementia Toolkit. So we have our Dementia Values and Priorities tool, and we have our Dementia Decoder. And all of these, again, can be found on our website under compassionandchoices.org/end-of-life planning, learn to finish strong tools. And lastly, I just want to say, you know, all of the work that we do is funded by individuals such as yourself. And it allows folks like myself, like Rose, like all of our staff members to do the work of the movement, and, you know, to work in hand in glove with our supporters to provide opportunities for folks to share their stories, to communicate with their friends and family, to develop tools such as the dementia tool, to really be on the forward edge of how to respond in the age of COVID. So I would encourage you, you know, if you've enjoyed this presentation, if you've been to some of our past webinars, and really enjoyed those, to donate if you can. And you can go to compassionandchoices.org/donate. And unfortunately, we would be having an in-person meeting or event, I should say, in October. But we thought it prudent with the age of COVID that we should move it to a virtual event. So we are going to have a national signature event that's happening virtually. So save the date. That will be happening December 8th, which is a Tuesday at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. You'll be hearing from Susan Pryor, who's in our development department, and her team about this event and how you can get involved.
And Jennifer, before you close out, if I could just interrupt for one moment. When I was going through the screen, I noticed that we had on the line Nancy Hoyt, who is one of our national board members. So I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge Nancy. In addition to us just being super privileged that Nancy's on the line, we also benefit because by Nancy being on the line, if she just simply tells people about our 3-to-1 match, anyone who decides to contribute today, it will be matched 3-to-1. So Nancy, could I put you on the spot and tell people about our 3-to-1 match? Did we lose Nancy?
Sorry, I was muted. There I am.
No worries.
It is my pleasure to tell about this. We have an anonymous donor who thinks so highly of our work and wants us to be able to move forward with lightning speed with that work. And so he offers a, excuse me, a match of 3-to-1 of any donation that you make through the Compassion and Choices board. So if you make a donation, we will make sure that it gets that 3-to-1. So that means a $1,000 donation becomes $4,000 to us. So this is huge.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's a great thing. And I hope that you will take advantage of that and support us in that way.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that.
And how do we do that? How do we do that?
All you have to do, if you know Susan prior, is let Susan know you were on the call, and she'll make sure that the match gets applied. If you don't know Susan, just reply back to this in any email you got and say, I'm sending a contribution in and it's eligible for the 3-to-1 match, and it will get to us and we'll make sure it gets matched.
Right. And lastly, I would just add like my contact information. Like if you can't find any of that information, it's just J Parrish Taylor. So JPARRISHTAYLOR at compassionandchoices.org. So you can reach out to me directly, and I can connect you with Susan if that's the easiest way for you to make that connection. Yeah, I would just close out by asking if there's any last minute questions that folks have. You know, this is a start of the conversation. We hope to have more of these, and we would love to get folks engaged and energized about, you know, the work that's happening in Oregon. Great. Well, if not, I just want to thank you all for joining our call. As I said, it has been recorded and we will be sharing it out to folks who have registered. So if you have a friend or family who wasn't able to make it today and you want to email it to them, you'll be able to do so. And again, feel free to email me with any questions, or if you want to get involved, I'd love to hear from you. And thank you again to Dan and John and to Kim and the great program that you all contributed to.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you all for
Thank
joining us.